Hello, I'm Brian P., and welcome to Scaling the Well. I dink, therefore I am. At least that's my quote, my version of it. um, are you a dink? Do you know what a dink is? That's what we're going to be discussing on today's podcast. So, I'm a dink, and what is that? So, basically, this is a term that I just kind of came across in the last year or so, but apparently it's gone back to the 1980s. A dink stands for double income, no kids. So plural, me and my wife are dinks, and I am a dink, singular. So what does that mean? Well, I think in today's society, this carries a lot of weight. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding that. And there's a lot of resentment, believe it or not, about people who choose to be dinks. Obviously, if you, infertile or something like that, some people aren't dinks by design. So others have made the conscious decision to not have children and just to kind of live their lives based on, their wants, but also based on their needs. And so let's get into that. With millennials, which is the generation below mine, they are not having babies and at a large rate. I just looked at an article from Forbes, and they cited some statistics from the Center from Disease Control that say birth rates in the United States are at an all-time low. And that scares a lot of people because that has economic implications. And baby boomers who are retiring or about to retire, they're worried. And even Generation Xers like myself, could be a little bit worried that they're not paying into the system. So if you don't have kids, and you don't have stable jobs, that's another stereotype, put on millennials that, they don't have secure jobs. A lot of them do, but there's just not a lot of them. And there as many, millennials as there were baby boomers. And people think that they're lazy. They're not lazy. Like when I work in human resources, there's a lot of wonderful millennials out there just busting their butt, trying to get, ahead in life. And there's a lot of economic shifts that have happened over the past decades that have made that a lot more difficult. So when you see somebody who's living at home, it doesn't necessarily mean they're lazy. It means that was the best economic choice for them. They're not having kids. It doesn't mean that they're selfish. That was the best economic choice for them. When you were the greatest generation, so the generation before the baby boomers, the ones who fought in World War II, like my grandfather, they came back from the war and they had this huge manufacturing base in the country that they could go to. So if you had a high school diploma, you graduated high school, didn't even need to go to college. You could go work for Ford Motor Company and stay there for life pretty much, and then retire with a pension. And with the salary that you made at that company, and many companies like it, you could afford a house. You could afford to have your spouse stay at home, and whether or not they wanted to stay at home, that's a whole nother podcast. We talk about women and women's rights and different things of that nature. But you could afford to do a lot more, and because you had your spouse staying at home, you didn't have to pay for childcare. Or you could have your parents move in with you, because you had a big enough house, and maybe they were the ones doing childcare, and it could be a shared thing. This is very common in the Asian and Latino communities, even to this day. They kind of figure that out because that's a huge. That's to me a sign of not just cultural but financial intelligence. So a lot of those things have changed, and a lot of those manufacturing jobs are no longer here. Actually, the majority of them that were here are no longer here. They're overseas. Ford just announced this year that they're not even going to be making cars anymore. They're going to concentrate on trucks, and the only car I think they're going to keep around is the Mustang. So even today, these jobs are being whittled away. Everything's more tech savvy jobs. There's a lot of jobs in the service industry, but then in the service industry, how much do they actually pay? So, and then there's a lot of social and political stuff surrounding these things, the fight to 15, to make sure people have a living wage. That's more of people on the left, and people on the right are just saying, well, people need to be more responsible and make better decisions. But, again, I always tell people, I'm a registered independent. I look at both sides. And it's usually more than one side, but if, let's just say there are two sides to an argument. I'll look at both of them, and both of them have merits and flaws. I do think people need to make better financial decisions, but I also think that when the culture was that, hey, you graduate, you go to high school, you get good grades, you go to college, you make it out of there, and then you get a job, that track isn't necessarily the same, especially when you add on student loans these days, and college has gotten so expensive. So even if you were a good student and you worked hard, when you get out of college, especially if you go on to get a master's degree, which is now the equivalent of what used to be just a bachelor's degree. It seems the stakes are being up. Soon you're going to need a PhD, which would be the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. You could get out of college and not have your first job, but yet have the debt of a mortgage on your shoulders, and you don't even have a house to live in. So people are making different financial decisions out of necessity, not necessarily because they're lazy. They're not living at home because they're lazy. They're not choosing to not have children because they're selfish. It's just the reality of our times, and will those circumstances change with different, political ebbs and flows? We'll see. We're in a weird political time as well. So being a DINK is not necessarily, it used to be a lot more scrutinized and, oh, you're selfish and everything. But I think a lot of more people are seeing, wait a minute, I think Brian had the right idea, yeah, because they were all listening to me, right? But let's get into it a little bit. And again, let me say I'm biased. I'm a DINK and I like my lifestyle. I'm taking time off work because it's a holiday this week, and I'm going to go to Disneyland. And my wife and I have annual Disneyland passes that people with Disneyland passes, they call us pass holes because I think they think that we're a little bit arrogant. People who have passes who can afford them are arrogant. I think it's just something, it's something we like to do. We go to Disneyland a lot, so we get our money's worth. And a lot of people who just go out to dinner and do different things every weekend, they spend their money on something else. So it is what it is. But I can do those things. If I had a child, I don't know if we could. I don't know or at least we can do these things as frequently, or maybe we'd get a pass that's a lot lower level and would be blocked out during the summer. So, let's talk about money management versus cultural management. So as I said, being a DINK, it is a financial decision. Now, some people, if you're not fertile, if you're infertile, it might be something that you didn't decide to do. Maybe you wanted to have kids and you couldn't. There's always the adoption option. I was adopted, and we'll get into that a little bit. But for a lot of the people, I think it's a choice. And because we have a lot of friends who are in their 40s and 50s who don't have kids. And there's a lot of people in our personal lives, and when I say our, I mean my wife and I, who criticize us on our spending habits sometimes. Not that they know how much money we have or whatever, but but then they have kids, right? And so I always come back. You chose to have a kid. That is $1 million decision on spending right there, and so I'll just give you something for example. So I have a friend at work. Him and his wife just had a baby. They're younger than us, right? But we're not the same classification, but we make about the same amount of money. And our wives, my wife's a lawyer, his wife's a microbiologist. They make, I would say, roughly the same amount of money. And we live in the same neighborhood. So if you want to look at demographics and everything and socioeconomics, it's about as close as you can get. So they just had a child, and he's a friend of mine, and he's into a lot of the same stuff. Like he's a nerd like I am. He's a big geek, right? And we're into comic book stuff. We always talk about movies and stuff, and we both like to go to Comic-Con. Well, we got our Comic-Con passes this year. He had to give his back, because and that's not necessarily a financial thing, but because he had paid for those before he found out his wife was pregnant. But the thing is that he, just the time, he needs to be there, and he has to give him back. And I was telling him this is going to be the start of a new thing because there's a lot of time associated with having a kid. But let's look at everything else. A lot of people, I said on a lot of podcasts, my wife and I drive BMWs. That's not a brag. It was actually more of an educational thing because I was telling people that we buy fleet vehicles. So we like BMWs and we think they're very excellent cars. I like driving them. But at the same time, I don't want to pay the depreciation on them. So we buy what we call fleet vehicles. So when we get a car, I was saying, my wife, she has a 2018 X1, very nice car, for family trips and stuff. But it had 4,000 miles on it, which knocked off like $10,000 off the sticker price. So she got a BMW for the price of like a Toyota, basically. And so, but it's still, a 2018. It's still new, but it's that's what we do, and that was a financial decision. He's not driving that car, and you could say, well, you're still paying more than somebody who drives like a Civic, or somebody who just drives a used car or something like that. Well, let's look at some of the financial breakdowns here. So if you look at my friend, do they have a nicer cars as we do? Well, they have nice cars, but I would say they don't cost as much, right? And do they have Disneyland passes? No. Do they go out to eat as much as my wife and I do? No, and you could say, well, you guys, that being my wife and I, and a lot of people have said this to us, you guys waste a lot of money, If I need a new vacuum cleaner, I don't try to get my vacuum cleaner fixed. I when my vacuum cleaner broke, I went to Best Buy and got a new one. That's what I do. When we had some plumbing issues in our condo, I just paid somebody to come over. He's like, yeah, well, if you did this, this, and this, you could save some money, And I'm like, no, well, we're going to have guests over pretty soon. And it was something with the toilets, and I needed it fixed right away. I didn't want to wait another month because in our building, you have to turn off the entire water, and you can only do that like once or twice a month. And it's a big hassle because we live in an older building. But we basically decided, like, no, just put in these new angle stops, and do this toilet rebuild because we have people that are going to be coming over in the next couple of weeks, and we can't wait to do that. Now, it was more expensive. It was probably $200 to $300 more expensive than if we would have waited, where we could have just installed entirely new toilets and it saved money. But I just made that decision, Nick. Yeah, just go ahead and do it. And a lot of people would say, that's not very wise, when you're spending money like that. I'm like, okay, maybe it's not. But a wise decision that we did is we don't have kids. When you don't have kids, you can make decisions based on your convenience more than other people. And again, I know I'm not trying to sound arrogant like that, but I'm just trying to tell you the reality of the situation. And this is something that you're seeing with the millennials. They're making decisions based on their financial circumstances. Whether you have money or you don't have money, you got to make the best decisions for you. So there's a lot of cultural pressure to have kids. And my mom, who's been divorced twice, she never pressured me to get married even. And I told everybody on previous podcasts, I didn't get married till I was 44. And I'm happy with that because I went out there and we'll get into that on another podcast, but I don't have any regrets. I don't think I missed out on anything. During my 30s, I had a lot of fun. And, but at the same time, financially, I was ready to have a wife when I was 44. I don't think there's a lot of people, and people say, well, there's people who get married in their 20s and 30s and they're doing okay. Yeah, more of them aren't. A lot of them are being divorced, and the number one reason people get divorced isn't necessarily because they found somebody hotter or whatever. They fight over money issues, and then they fight over the family issues pour into money issues. The money issues pour into family issues, even extended family issues. Well, why can't we loan my mother this kind of money? With my wife, we're able to help her mother out and stuff. And I don't want to give away too much of the end of this podcast, but I just want you to get in your headspace that being a DINK is not selfish because of the things you can actually do for other people as well. So let's go into the advantages of being a DINK, right? And as in most podcasts, I like to at least break things down into threes. So number one, money. Yeah, we do have more disposable income. You have two working professionals, and I brought up my friend for a reason. They're doing it now. My friend and his wife, they're also working professionals. They're no longer dinks because they had their first kid. Before they even had the child, they had to go into to get on a list for childcare, just because it's so incredibly competitive to get into a good childcare program. So somebody to watch your child while you work, and the childcare cost, and they said they got a deal on this, and I couldn't believe it, because I never had to look for it myself. I think they're going to end up paying somewhere over $1,200 a month, and they said that's a good deal because there's other places that were the average is like $1,600 a month or something ridiculous. And I'm thinking like I could get 3 BMWs for that, paying that a month. You know what I mean? So, and I don't say that to be funny and to say, oh, that I care about cars more than kids. What I'm saying is that when you decide to have a kid, that is a big financial decision that outweighs all of my frivolous spending. Even if you want to call it frivolous, I don't think it's frivolous, but if you wanted to call it that, wow, $1,200 a month. And that was the good end of it. That was a deal. Okay. And that's just when the kid is a baby. So what happens when your kid gets into school? Okay, maybe you don't have to pay for childcare as much because the kid will, in 6 years, the kid will be in first grade, or let's say even kindergarten. Then you're paying for the kid's food and clothes, Why can I go out to a nice restaurant with my wife? Because we're only paying for 2 people. It's that simple. That's basic math. You don't have to graduate high school or even elementary school to figure out that kind of math. Let's say housing. Forget all the little stuff like clothes and childcare, which aren't little things, but just to have a house. So I have a condo, and if I wanted to have a kid, we would need a lot more space. So we live in Southern California. I live in San Diego, but anybody in Southern California, there's people I see on my Facebook feed every day. Friends of mine who I came up with, like, I'm getting out of Southern California. I'm done with it. And you ask them why. Sometimes they'll give like political reasons because they think California is a little too liberal, but more often than not, it's because of the cost of living. And if you want to buy a house in San Diego, you're looking at about $600,000, for a decent, for a house you could say that's nice, right? For a condo, even 2-bedroom condo, you're looking at a minimum of, around 300, a minimum, for something that's decent. Man, and if you wanted to spend that same amount of money in Kentucky or Wyoming, man, you're getting a house that's like 5 bedrooms on an acre, for the price of a 2-bedroom condo in San Diego. And then there's competitiveness. So even if you have the money to spend that way, you're still fighting to get that condo. It's not like, okay, well, I have that $300,000 or I have that $600,000 for the house. There's other people who have that too, and now you're in a bidding war to pay for something that's really overpriced. Because I think there's going to be a correction, and it's going to come down a little bit probably in the next 18 to 36 months. If you're looking at the there's different indicators that the Treasury bond indicator saying that it's flattening out, so another recession could be coming. But yeah, even when it comes down, okay, so let's say that $600,000 house is now $400,000. That's still a lot of money for a lot of people, and so. But I don't have to expand my living space. If I do that, it's by choice. It's because we want a bigger house, and if I'm not paying for childcare, that $1,200 a month or whatever, then I could say, well, maybe I'll keep my condo and not sell it, and I'll just buy another house and rent this one out. and then the money that I'm saving can go for the upkeep on my condo because I'll have renters and whatever. So I have more financial choices. But culturally, yeah, there's a lot of people who want us to have kids, but that's for their selfish reasons. You know what I mean? So that's one of the advantages is disposable income. The second advantage is time. And this is where I could say it's a little more selfish, right? We want to go on a trip. Basically, the only people we need to ask or get permission from is our employer. We just tell our bosses, hey, we want to use some of our time to take off. We get that approved and we go. We actually have a vacation account that we put money away just for our entertainment. You know what I mean? Other people are saving for their kids' college funds and stuff. We have a household account where we put money away. So if we have any household fixes and stuff, if we have plumbing issues or anything like that, we need to replace carpet or need to get a new appliance or whatever, we have an account for that. Cash, I like playing cash as much as possible. I don't want to get into huge credit card debt. But we also have an entertainment account. So if we go on vacation, we try to pay for that in cash as well. When you have kids, I see a lot of people with these kids, if you want to go on vacations, a lot of that, it gets harder to save. So you're not going to be able to go on as many if you want to do cash, or you fall into that trap of putting a lot of stuff on credit. And then that gets you in more trouble. So, yeah, we just want to be able to go. We snap the fingers like Thanos and we're gone, and we have these type of jobs. Even the jobs that we have, we could afford to go to school. My wife went to law school. I went to get my master's, get my MBA. I had the time to do that later in life because I didn't have kids. If you have kids, it's harder to do that. If you're picking kids up, and they're in the 6 to 6 program, you got to pick your kid up by 6 o'clock. That's even if you get in a 6 to 6 program. Again, I was in child welfare and I seen the struggles of single moms, single dads, even if you are lucky enough to have a child in the 6 to 6 program, you got to be there at 6 o'clock. That's the time my class started for my master's program. You had to be in class by 6 o'clock. So you really had to work some logistics if you were a single parent in order to go to school. And because I went to school, I have a job, or I got promoted, because I already had a job, but I got promoted and started rising through the ranks a little bit, to where I get some pretty good benefits, and I have a lot of vacation hours saved up, and I take them, and I get paid even though I'm on vacation. A lot of people don't have that, and so these all kind of cascade into one another. So there's time, and then and this is kind of related to time, but it's freedom. When we go, I don't need to go somewhere that's kid friendly. I don't need to go. We can pretty much go anytime we want. You have the freedom of pursuing endeavors. Like if I had a 2-year-old right here, do you think I could be doing this podcast? My wife right now, she's at the store buying some things we need for the house and the things that we need for going on our little vacation. But could we do that? Because she, either she would have to take the kid or I would have to be here with the kid. And I couldn't just say, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to shoot one out today. No, I'd have to schedule that. I don't even know if I would be able to afford the equipment that I have to do a podcast. And so those are the advantages, right? And there's a lot more advantages that you can read into it. But let's go into some of the disadvantages. Number one, if you are a DINK or a DINK couple, in a family, you're DINKs, you're expected to contribute a lot more because, yes, you have disposable money, but people always exaggerate it because just because you're going to Disneyland or just because you drive a car that might be nicer than theirs, they think that you got a lot more money than you actually have. So, yes, we do have more disposable income than some people, but people exaggerate that. They think you're rich. And so when it's time to go to dinner with family members and stuff, when the check comes, a lot of people are going to look at you. when somebody has an emergency in the family, even if it's like something that has nothing to do with you, people who are hundreds of miles away, you kind of get that phone call or or whatever, that like, hey, so and so is going through a rough time, blah blah blah. What do you think? They don't necessarily ask you for money, but then, what do you think? It's like, well, what do you mean? What do I think? I know what you're asking. Can we help? And again, it's not a bad thing, right? You should help if you can. Like, and I'm of the thing that I don't like loaning people money. I'm of the mindset that if I have the money to give you, I'll give it to you, no strings attached. I don't think that, and we could talk about this in another podcast, but I don't think that, like, if you have like a family member or a friend who needs help, you're helping them by saddling them with more debt. That doesn't help, because now if they couldn't pay something, if they couldn't pay a bill, if they couldn't pay their rent that month or whatever, now they can't pay their rent the following month because the circumstances didn't change or didn't change dramatically. Now they owe this other bill plus you. And you're just causing them more stress. So if I can afford to give somebody money, here, it's yours. You know what I mean? If I can't, then I just say no. I can't do that. I'll pay you back. I'm like, no, I don't do loans. Now, I'll give people money, and again, we're getting back to the enabling podcast, and I really suggest that one because that's something that's probably a lot more important than what we're talking about right now, because that's kind of a building block of a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in future podcasts, and this one included. But if somebody needs money and they're going to need money next month and they're just not taking the steps to change their life, then no, I'm not going to give you money because it's not helping. As a matter of fact, I'm just enabling, and I'm actually hurting you. I'm hurting you, and I'm paying to hurt you. And I only want to pay for things that I need, or things that are fun, or things that are helping. If it doesn't fall into one of those categories, then nada. So that's one disadvantage. You're expected to contribute more, and not just in money. When there's family gatherings and when there's things of that nature, people are going to expect you to kind of, there's an elderly person in the family that needs a ride, or there's a person who's not elderly but they just, they're not very responsible. They need a ride. Well, they're going to look at you. You're the one that doesn't have kids, so they're going to say, hey, can you step up and do this and you're doing you become the family's Uber, so to speak, and that's okay too. It's whatever. It can get annoying because I think these things shouldn't be. I don't think anybody should expect something from anybody. I think it should be nice to have. And if people didn't expect as much, we would probably be more prone to offer. Because we don't mind doing these things. But when people begin to expect certain things out of you, resentment kind of builds up. And I try to keep that from happening between, with me and my wife and other people, And it's not just family, it's friends, and stuff too. But, yeah, so, then there's that. So, and then the third thing, and this is a big one, and this is where the cultural piece comes in, is legacy, right? And that could be, and that's manifests itself in two ways. One, it starts off small. Well, don't you want kids that look like you or somebody that looks like you? No, I'm not a narcissist. Like, why would I want a clone of me just because it looks like me? You know what I mean? That's the most. You think being a DINK is superficial. There's nothing more superficial than wanting another human being just because they look like you. But then there's also the second part of legacy is, well, what are people, who's going to take care of you in your old age? And this comes in my wife's family is Asian. And that's kind of, in China, they're even suing their kids now. They have the government gave permission for parents to sue their kids because they're not taking care of them, is within the old Confucius, 7 generations under one roof type of thing. And in America, maybe your kid will take care of you. I don't think that's the reason to have a kid. First of all, you don't know if your kid's going to be able to take care of you. Second, when I was working with kids, when I was a youth development counselor, one of the things I did was took them to a convalescent home. And these were, in this particular convalescent home, there was a lot of upper middle, or at least they were at one point, upper middle class Caucasian people for the majority of the people, the residents there, and they all had kids, And yet they were so excited for us to bring kids there to read with them and play games with them because their kids weren't visiting. Their kids might be helping to pay the bills of their convalescent home, and sometimes not. But just because you have a kid doesn't mean they're going to take care of you in your old age. So that's a bad investment. That's like buying lottery tickets, hoping that you're going to retire off the winnings. It's just not. Now it's always nice to have kids that will do that, but I don't think that's a reason to have a child. And then the third thing is like, well, what about your legacy just as your name, traveling on throughout history? Because having kids is really the only form that we have until technology catches up with us of immortality. And the way I think about that is that, well, if you do good work, the world is your legacy. I don't need to have a great grandson who's taken over a foundation I've started. I don't care who takes over. I have a small charity that I started that helps foster kids get into martial arts for free at no cost to them or their caregivers. And then I work with other people who help law enforcement, who help veterans with PTSD, women's self-defense programs, or women who've been victims of domestic violence, So I'm involved in a lot of things, and I don't need to have a child for my legacy. I think legacy comes from good work. Just like I said, happiness. And when I was talking in one of my dating podcasts, you shouldn't seek happiness because happiness is a byproduct of good work. So if you do good work, you're going to have a good legacy, whether you have kids or not. You could do a lot of good stuff, and you could have a really crappy kid who's in and out of jail and accused of all kinds of misdeeds and misconduct. So I don't think the kid necessarily ensures your legacy. It's the work that you put into it. And if you do have a good kid who goes on to do great things, again, that's just hard work that you put into that kid. So if you do good work, hard work, then your legacy will be secure. I'm not worried about that. And then just to tap it off, if we do want to have kids, we can adopt. What's more selfless than that, right? They say it's selfish not to have kids. Well, I think it's more selfish to have kids knowing that there's kids out there that need a home, and they're in the system, and they're in foster care and sometimes group homes, and they actually need parents. And you're saying, well, no, I want a kid that looks like me. Well, who makes you more? Which one of us is more selfish in that scenario, right? And I know people who are in their 60s who have adopted, and I'm not the type of person who needs to adopt a baby. I could adopt a 10-year-old. I don't care. I think kids are kids, and and people say, well, what about these horror stories you hear about kids, blah, blah, blah. It's like, first of all, you got to be able to handle what you choose. You get to choose kids for one of when you adopt them. If they're already school age, you already kind of know what kind of kids there are. And then the worst kids that I've ever come in contact with, whether it was when I was a kid myself or when I was an adult, are kids who weren't adopted. They were just had, and then you don't know what you're going to get because their personalities developed the way they did. And some of them are just real jerks, And you could have 5 kids in a family. The chances of all 5 kids becoming all-stars and just great citizens are against you. That's wishing for a lot. You know what I mean? 3 out of 5 is good. If you have 3 kids and 2 out of 3 become good citizens, you've done a good job. You're always going to have that one kid who's not as much. Then hopefully that kid's just a little bit of a slacker and not somebody who's actually causing harm to others or whatever. So that's just my podcast for the day. It's about being a DINK. I thought it was a little more lighthearted. Again, it's a holiday week for me, and we're about to go on a little bit of a mini vacation. So hopefully this was a little bit enlightening, a little bit funny, and a little bit more insight into my personal life. But this is Brian P. This has been Scaling the Well. Until next time, take care.